We can continue down this renewables only path and keep watching our prices skyrocket while also failing to meet demand and also doing next to nothing to reduce emissions.
In Dan Crenshaw's mind, a switch over to renewable energy wouldn't do much, if anything, to stop emissions. Okay, I'm gonna have to look up his academic work in the field. He seems like an expert. But that was what he chose to use his time for, as the House Committee on Energy and Commerce had a hearing where 6 oil and gas executives came on to talk about oil production, inflation, and climate change. Obviously, fossil fuels and our reliance on them have left us in a position where not only are we racing towards a climate apocalypse, but we also, when the price of gas goes up, we're screwed. There's nothing we can do. But that, as much as he talks about having an issue with the price of gas, and as much as many Republicans do, he does not want us to get off of gas. He wants us to be just as vulnerable. And so instead of talking about a smooth transition, he instead just wants to give support to oil and gas, and you'll see a little bit more of that in this.
The fact is that global energy demand will increase by 50% by 2050, and oil and gas is still expected to make up the lion's share of the production. You cannot change these facts. The fact is that renewables will never meet that demand, never. And here's the most important fact. If American natural gas quadrupled in the next decade in exports, which is entirely possible according to industry experts, we would do something amazing. We would displace coal around the world. And wow, just like that, you solve the energy crisis. And by the way, reduced emissions far, far more than the foolish $10 trillion Green New Deal ever could.
And that might be true if natural gas was good for the environment, which it isn't. In some ways, it might be moderately better than coal, but far, 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 far worse than any actual renewable form of energy, because it leads to increased accumulations of methane in the atmosphere. And methane is, depending on which study you look at, 25 times to 89 times worse than carbon dioxide. And so yes, there will be less coal in producing emissions, but there will still be tons of emissions. And the issue fundamentally, guys, is that he will pretend as if, no, you environmentalists, you have been duped. In fact, if you really want to reduce emissions, then what you need is more fossil fuels to be burned. But we know that he doesn't care about that. He's being paid by the guys that he's talking to. His re-election bid is propped up by money from fossil fuel companies. Someday, perhaps a seat on a board or as a lobbyist will be available to him. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, Dan Crenshaw is totally insincere in all of this. A couple of years ago, you might remember this. There was a big push by the oil and gas industry, as they have done so many times, to try to cover up what they're actually doing to the environment and act like they're good stewards, right? So the carbon footprint, your individual carbon footprint, this whole myth came from oil and gas to place the blame on you, the consumer, and not what they're doing. A couple of years ago, they trotted out this new idea that would help mitigate climate change, and the Republicans, obviously, because they're all in their pockets, championed it. It was carbon capture. We don't need to worry about the Green New Deal. We need to do carbon capture. And Dan Crenshaw was one of the leading proponents of carbon capture. And you can just draw a straight through line from the oil and gas industry to people like him who helped, lie and misinform people about the effects of the oil and gas industry on the climate, on the environment. And he's a proud mouthpiece for them. So this is obviously bogus. And I'm glad people here see through it, and I wish more people would.
Yeah.
So Dan Crenshaw, every other time I see him, he's pushing the Republican message, the old Republican message that world safety depends on American control of the oil markets. And that always goes back to what he's always talking to, because obviously, as you pointed out, he's getting, this donor money from oil companies, but also underneath that, it's about defending the petrodollar. One of the biggest reasons that the United States is in the Middle East all the time is defending that petrodollar. Anytime anybody wants to sell oil in anything other than American currency, boom, boom, boom. We come and we bomb them up and we replace their government with somebody who will keep selling it in American dollars. So that's all this is really about. Because the notion that making clean energy isn't the way to go doesn't make any logical sense. And this is the same thing we did with lead and everything that we do with gas and everything. We kept lead in products for decades because keep the money rolling.
Exactly, and my demand coming out of this is to the solar and wind industries. Can you please start buying off politicians like Dan Crenshaw? Because that seems like it's the only way that's going to move in the right direction.
That's a great idea, actually.
But anyway, he's spinning this fantasy of if we only burn enough dead dinosaurs, then humanity will flourish and everything will be great. Well, things are already bad and they're getting worse. The number of people displaced by climate change related disasters since 2010 has already gone above 21.5 million. Each one of those a tragedy, and in some, terrible. By the way, by 2050, it could be somewhere between 216 and 1.2 billion people. But I'm sure Republicans are going to be very reasonable about the flood of tens of millions of people across the border because of the climate crisis that we're contributing to. Probably not. And it very much is here. Earlier this week, the latest report from the IPCC came out, and it made clear that without urgent action, humanity is going to fail to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And we know, as we've talked about hundreds and hundreds of times on this channel, that that's going to be devastating in a lot of different ways. One other fact, though, we've made allegations, baseless allegations, that he has been bought by these industries. Well, just to be clear, among the 6 executives who received a recent, you saw the video of the talk from Crenshaw, Chevron CEO Michael Wirth, ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods. Chevron and ExxonMobil, by the way, are both among the top 10 contributors to Crenshaw, 29,000 and 23,000 respectively. Crenshaw's received a total of nearly $700,000 in campaign donations from the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas sector has given Johnson, who's that, Ron? Bill Johnson, 725,000. So by the way, in terms of what they've given him individually just this last year, the 29,000, like it is pathetic how cheaply they can be bought off. But in some across their career, would you trust the opinion of a person on a topic from an industry where they'd gotten $700,000? Would a regular person ever trust someone who had done that? No, people understand the corrosive impact of money in politics, and no amount of faux illusions of human flourishing are gonna hide the fact that he has been bought. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thought is just we always glaze over just the quantity of money that these people get from these companies over time. We're just so used to hearing the numbers that that you don't think anything of it. But these people are getting millions of dollars from these companies. Of course, they're going to do what they want.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it also reflects his pivot from when he entered Congress, because he was kind of close with like the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Matt Gaetz crowd. And then he eventually just kind of broke very quietly, but he did break off from them and charted his new course. And here's the incentive. Hey, you drop all that lunatic stuff and look at you have waiting for you. We'll fund your campaigns, you do our bidding. There's going to be something waiting for you when you leave Congress. It shows kind of like a very evil but political evolution on Crenshaw's part. And he probably would have been an easier person to oust. Maybe not in Texas, but because of his early associations while he was in Congress.